What we're going to be looking at today is building and animating this letter E that I created for the 5th day of 36 days of type. We're going to be using the fantastic divider plugin created by Alexsei Karpik. This was first brought to my attention by a recent tutorial by CG Shortcuts. I'll put a link to that tutorial in the description below. Now on Alexsei's Behance page, I kind of scrolled down and I saw here this kind of really curved application of his divider plugin. So I basically thought that'd be a cool idea to use for one of my letter submissions, and so I thought I'd build that, work out how it was done, and then share that with you guys. So before we start, let's just make sure you download and install Alexsei's plugin. He's offering it for free, but please support him if you can. This works with R16 and up, and I'm using R20. So let's get started. Right, let's start by bringing in a plane, and I'm going to make this 300 by 400. I'm going to turn on the garage shading lines just so we can see our segments, and I'm going to bring in the divider plugin and drop the plane into the divider. Now you can see it comes up with this note that an object must be less than 50 polygons. I'm going to change that here. I'm going to go right down to a width of 1 and height segments of 2, and then if you uncheck and recheck this, you can see that then applies the plugin. It updates that, and I found that, you know, if you change the size, for instance, then you'd need to do the same thing. So let's just put that back. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is actually get this animated. So if we click on the divider plugin, go into here. Now actually before I do that, there's this algorithm tab where we have Taylor and Dimitri. Now this refers to Dimitris Ladopoulos and Matt Taylor, whose work inspired Alexsei to recreate their algorithms for this plugin. So I'll add links to both of their work below so you can see how it was influenced. I'm going to pick the Taylor algorithm for now, and I'm going to leave the iterations at 3. Now if we go down to the bottom, we've got this noise loop progress, and that is how we're going to animate our divider. So if we go to frame 0, I'm going to set a keyframe. Then on frame 100, I'm going to put this up to 100 and set another keyframe. Now if I press play, you can see we're already getting that animation. But we've actually got an ease in, ease out automatically on the timeline. So I'm just going to select that, select our keyframes and make those linear. So we've got linear keyframes, so we've just got a constant motion. For the noise itself, I'm going to go back into here and turn the noise amount up. That just makes it more of a dramatic amount of motion. Then I'm also going to adjust the frequency. So let's just play this through. So we've kind of got something more constant happening. Okay, so that's that. So the next thing we're going to do is add some thickness to this. I'm going to do that using the cloth surface. So let's bring that in, and we'll make the divider a child of the cloth surface. Now the cloth surface has already put on a division of 1, so we can kind of still see how they're properly divided, but we're going to add colors and bevels on soon, which will kind of make this more obvious. We'll leave the subdivisions at 1. I'm going to change the thickness to 4. Okay. And then we're going to move straight on. We're going to get a bevel, and we're going to make the cloth surface a child of the bevel. Now we can't see anything at the moment because what we're going to do is actually fracture the object, and that's going to drive some color information and also where these bevels go. So let's bring that in next. Let's get the MoGraph fracture, and then we'll put the bevel into the fracture. And there you can see that's updated. Now first thing I'll do is, you see the bevel is putting bevels all over the place, but we just want it on the edges. So if you go into bevel, we just want to tick use angle. So then now that's just applying it to those edges. Okay, so what we want to do next is bring some color into this. So we can do that through the fracture object by adding an effector, and the effector we want is the random effector. So we go to MoGraph with fracture selected, MoGraph, effector, random. Now the first thing, if we go to fracture again, we need to change the mode. At the moment it's treating everything as one object. We need to change it to explode segments. So that random is now, like you would expect, it's applying some random positioning to our object, but this is what we don't want for this. I mean, you probably could make something interesting, if I press play, there you go, you could probably make some sort of interesting animation applying that, but we're actually going to turn that off. And what we're going to turn on is under color, got color mode, we're going to set that to effector color. So now the random effector is applying a random set of colors to our divider boxes. So now we've got the colors, I don't need the lines anymore, so I'm going to turn on ground shading, get rid of the lines. Okay, so next let's group our object so far, and I'm going to call that plane. And then I'm going to bring in a text object, an E, and I'm just going to use this as a guide. I'm using this Big John font. It's kind of like my rough guide for how each of the letters should work to. So they look like they're part of a set, I guess. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take this plane that we have, and we're going to wrap this around a circle to make a pipe. So to do that, we're going to bring in a circle, and I'm going to take the radius down to about 20. And then I'm going to bring in a spline wrap, and I am going to add that in to our plane folder. So this spline wrap is going to wrap anything else that's in this folder. Now we can quickly just actually get the circle, stick that into the spline, see what we've got. As per usual, the spline wrap never seems to work first time. It's once in a blue moon it actually works in the way you want it to. What we're going to do is actually rotate this on the p-value through 90 degrees, and there we go, we've got our pipe. Now we can up our subdivisions, but the problem we have is that, see, it's kind of running slow already, and we want to preview what we're doing. I could probably even turn off the bevel. Now we've got the colors, we can at least kind of see how our animation is working. So let's just leave it like this for now. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to take this pipe, and we actually want to make it run around this outer edge of the E. So we need to create a spline that's going to do that. So let's look into our front view, and I'm going to bring in a rectangle. I'm going to change the scale this down, and I want this to kind of be running around the center of the letter shape. I'm going to change this to 118, 118. And then I'm going to change the rounding. Now, you could have quite a tight corner, but use it with a thick pipe like this. A tight corner will mean you end up with like a fold, like a 90-degree angle, which we don't want. So I found actually upping this, I'm going to up this to 30. Okay, we'll make this editable. We'll go to point mode. Click here. Actually, I'll untick close spline, and then we can delete these points. Now I can move these into position, and I'll actually move these back a bit so they're centered up. Okay, so this is what we're going to run our pipe around, and we're going to do that using another spline wrap. So we'll add the other spline wrap in, and we want to do a couple of things. The first thing I want to do is just tidy this up a little bit. So let's go pipe bends, I think we'll call this. I'm going to group all these. They're kind of like our assets that we're using, so I'm going to call that assets. And then I'm actually going to group these objects together, and I'm going to call this pipe. Okay, now the spline wrap, let's go into here. If we hide our original spline wrap, you see this spline wrap is still trying to auto size to the size of the plane that's underneath it. So the spline wrap, you can't say fit to parent, it just tries to auto size to whatever folder it's in, and it's not seeing this spline wrap, it's just seeing the original. So what we need to do is actually force this to be a certain shape. So first off, I'm just going to rotate our spline wrap through 90 degrees. And then if we come down to bounding box, we can set this manually. So we want the bounding box size to be, the length is 400 because we set that originally in our plane. And then our circle that we created was like 20 radius, so it's 40 wide. Okay, so we can set that both. And then I'm gonna set all these numbers to 0. So everything's centered up. it's kind of poking out a little bit. I think I will just up this to maybe like 45 by 45 so it's completely covered. Okay, so now we can run our pipe along the pipe bend. So let's bring that into here, and there we go. We've got our E out of shape. Now let's hide the assets folder, and I'll hide Spline wrap. If I press play, we can see it animating. Now before we move on, I'll just do some housekeeping to make sure that it's looking how we want to. So let's turn on our bevel, and I'm going to take our cloth surface and turn up the subdivisions. I'm going to turn this up to 3. I just want to make sure that our edges are looking nice and reasonably smooth. What I would probably like to do is up the bevel offset, maybe turn that to like 1.5, and the subdivision, let's try and add in a couple. There we go, so we've got a nice smoother edges. And if I go to the original plane, to the Fong tag, I might have a play around with turning off this edge breaks. There you go, so that gives us a nicer smooth edge by turning that off. And then on bevel you can limit the edges. That's not affecting it at the minute. We'll see what once we come to rendering how that looks. But that we've got a nice kind of Super Mario style set of bricks now. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is build the part in the middle, and I'm not actually going to use the divider plugin for that. I'm going to use the volume builder, volume mesher. So let's do that quickly, and then we can move on to getting this materialed up and set up in Octane for rendering. Okay, so let's go into the front view, and the first thing I'll do is actually turn this back on just so I can see our text, so we can use that as a guide. Okay, I'm going to start by bringing in a capsule. I'm going to put the orientation through the +X, and then I'm going to set this up so it's in the correct position. So it kind of looks nice for our E. I'll make it a little bit wider. There we go. It doesn't matter, it's poking out a bit. So I think in the angle it's going to look quite nice. We want to make it sure it definitely looks like an E. Okay. I'm going to hide our bits there, and then what the next thing I'm going to do is just bring in a cube, and I'm going to scale this down, and I'm going to basically cut out the middle and make a couple of slices. So let's set that up there. Let's just make this a width of, let's call it even 30 by 30 by 50. Actually, no. In the Y, probably need that to be something more like 50. Okay, so 50 by 50 by 30. Okay, and now I can bring in a volume builder and a volume mesher. Now I want these to kind of, just for my sake of OCD-ness, and also it can cause problems down the line, I want to make sure everything is centered around the capsule, because when I add rotation I don't want the offsets to be all over the place. So what I'm going to do is just grab both of these pieces, put them under the capsule, and this PSR button is for position, size and rotation. It just resets everything to 0. So I'm just setting it all under the capsule. Now I've got a custom palette here, but you can find it in the menu. So if I bring this back up, I'm going to put the builder into the mesher, the cube and the capsule into the builder. And if I go to the builder, I'm going to put the voxel size down to something small like 0.5, and the cube I'm going to say subtract. I'm going to add in some smoothing. I'm going to set the voxel distance to 1 and the strength to 50%. Obviously you can do whatever you like, you can do it to taste. This is what I have done to kind of set this E up, but you could make it more blobby or more more straight as much as you wanted to. So, but this is the settings I'm going with for now. I might change this to 2 actually. Yeah, so I just wanted to smooth out those edges a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to call this one ends, and then I'm going to duplicate it and go back to our side view, and I'm going to select here the cube. Rather than subtracting, I'm going to make this intersect. So now we've got this block in the middle. I'm going to copy that cube, and this one I'm going to set kind of in the center. We're going to cut out a section here. Put this back in again. Make sure our hierarchy is correct. So our cube here is going to, actually we're going to subtract. So that leaves us with this top half. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call this top half, middle. Okay, then copy that. And we're going to call this one bottom half. Oh, middle. Okay, and for this, I'm going to take this cube and we're just going to reverse it by bringing it up. So then we've got the other half. Okay. Now to set this up for animation, I'm going to use a shader effect to affect the noise to make it rotate. But what I'll do is get all these pieces, and I'm going to go MoGraph cloner, and I'm going to add these all into a cloner. Okay. Now, like I was saying about center point, when I get that cloner, put it into the capsule, do PSR again to make sure everything is zeroed out, basically. So everything is in the same zero space. I'm going to add that to the cloner. And then in here, I'm actually just going to turn this down to 0. We've got count of 3. We've got 3 pieces. If you were to turn this count down, see things would disappear. So we just want a count of 3. I'm going to put this down here. I'm going to call this middle arm. And then our random effector that we had, I'm going to apply that to the middle arm as well. And then that's going to add the same random colors that we've applied to the rest of our E. So what we're going to do is drive the animation using a shader effector. So with the middle arm selected, let's go to effector and select shader. Now it's turned white and got big, partly because of the scale, so let's turn that off. But the color mode on here is overwriting the color mode that we added from the random. So let's just turn that off because we only want one set of random colors. And then the shading, the amount of motion we're going to drive with a noise, our parameter will change first. So let's just change this to something like, I'll say 180, so it might flip to the other side on the pitch, I think. So let's go to shading, let's bring in a noise, and I'm going to up the scale to something like 200, and the speed, we'll set that to 1. And the loop period is 4 because it's 4 seconds. Our 100 frames, 25 frames per second. And the contrast, I might just whack that up a bit just so that we get some obvious animation. If I press play, now everything's running super slow because we've got our bevel and subdivisions on the cloth surface turned up. So for the moment, just to check what our animation looks like, I'm going to uncheck the bevel and cloth surface. I'm going to take that down to 2. We can press play and we can see that animating. Let's see what that's doing. It's kind of happening just in the middle. So I'm going to go onto the shader again. I might turn this animation speed up. I might turn this global scale back to 100. Let's see. Wow, that's too intense. Maybe back down to 1. Kind of doing nothing and then doing lots. Maybe if I put this contrast down. No, I can hardly see it. I think what I might do is take this whole middle arm section and just rotate it around because I just want to see that slice. I press play. There we go. So now we've got that working as well. So then we've got both pieces of animation working. I'm happy with how both of them look. So I'll go back to frame 0. I'm going to save where I'm at, and I'm going to turn beveling back on, and then I'm going to put cloth surface subdivisions back up to 3. That's where I'm happy. So now all our modeling is set up. Now we want to go into Octane and set this up for rendering. Okay, so here we are in the Octane live viewer, and I've done a couple of things. I've just imported the scene that I created for the Squishy A tutorial, and I did that so that my E would be on the same angle. So all of my 36 days all kind of look like they're in the same family, basically. And from that scene, I've got the two lights that I created. So I've just got one on the left, one on the right. I've got the Octane sky, where I'm using this Pixel Lab, I think it's called Car Studio 2 EXR image. And then we've got our Octane camera. Okay, I'm on path tracing, and I've reset the size of my screen to be 1000 by 1250. So that's what I export all of my Instagram posts at. Okay, so to do this, we'll just bring in a new glossy material. I'm going to call this E, and then I'm going to apply that to our middle arm, and within our pipe I want to apply that to our fracture. Now straight off the bat, it's just applying, this is a white glossy material, and it's just applying that directly to our objects. It's overwriting that kind of random colorness that we had from the random effector. So we need a way of actually pumping that random color value into our material. So let's open up the material. We'll go into the node editor, and then we can actually, if we search up here, we can use the MoGraph color shader, which is native to Cinema 4D, and then Octane is pulling that in. So if we pump that straight into the diffuse channel, you can see that it's bringing in those exact random colors that we originally had on our from our random effector. Now this might be what you're going after, but I want to have a bit more control over the colors that I want to display. So we can do that by actually bringing in a gradient. So if I bring a gradient in here, and what we want to do is pump the color shader into the gradient. Now what this is going to do is the color shader, all the random colors, they're going to actually pick points from this random from this gradient. So if we pump the gradient into the diffuse channel, see, rather than being those totally random colors, it's now picking basically random points from this gradient. So we could open this up, we could load a color preset in here, or we can just come in and change the colors to whatever we like to have more control over the color range. And you can add in more colors in here to kind of, you know, make that more interesting. Okay, now for my render I used a couple of colors, so I'm just going to delete that. I used a green grad initially, and I'm just going to read off the values I use. So 103, 100, 56, and I did that through to 92, 55 by 100. Okay, and then I feel like that's getting some sort of Super Mario vibes going on. And then for my stage, oh actually no, before I move on to the stage, what I want to do is I want to get rid of this super shininess and kind of make it look a bit more roughed up and plasticky, and I'm going to do that using an image texture. So we'll bring that in, and I'm going to pump that into the roughness channel. So if I click the image texture, and then I've got all of these kind of roughness materials, grunge maps. I'm just going to pick one, bring that in. Okay, and then you can see now we're getting some nice like little variation. We've got our reflection on there, but it kind of looks a bit more real worldy, a bit more plasticky, which I really like. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just set up the background, and that's going to be something relatively simple, just another simple material. So we'll go materials, Octane glossy. I'm going to drag that onto my studio, which is just this extruded spline, just a curve. I'll call that studio. And then in the diffuse channel, I'm going to make this a yellow. So this is 58, 48, and 96. Okay. And then I kind of want to get rid of that little shine at the background. So I'm just going to, on the roughness, turn that up to 0.2, just to roughen it up and just blend that in. So now we're basically set up for rendering. Now, if you want to look at my techniques for how I render out quickly and cleanly, please check out my other tutorial about my workflow. If you like this, please like and subscribe if you're not already, and I'll plan to produce a tutorial about once a week. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.